I lived in a gray house in the middle of nowhere, Oregon, for the early years of my life. And I say early years because the word childhood just doesn't seem to roll off my tongue anymore. You see, between the ages of 12 and 15, I lived there for a good reason. The house was nice, it was a good area, affordable for my parents, and it was relatively tranquil and quiet. It may have seemed good then, but they made a mistake that they were sure to regret for the rest of their lives. The downfall was this: I had no neighbors, no kids that I could be friends with at all, and there was rarely anything interesting around. It's hard for me to remember some small details because it was such a long time ago now, but luckily or unluckily, people tend to remember the most traumatic and painful experiences in their lives. Everything that happened, I call them the dark days, started when I was 15 and decided to be adventurous and explore the forest path beside the house. I still remember looking upon the path, immediately looking back to the red front door of the house to make sure my parents weren't watching, and going to venture through the woods. I walked to the edge of the roots, and I stared into the dark, lifeless soul of the elms before continuing on. And after the courage welled up inside of me, I ran down the rugged path. Running through the forest, it felt like I was running through a patch of cold air the entire time. It was like when there's air conditioning in one room, and you get that sudden blast of cold as soon as you walk into it. There was an ominous fog that seemingly hovered above the ground, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I slowed to a jog, even slower to a walk, then a halt. I was lost. There was so much fog that I could barely see, and it felt like something was closing in on me, watching me, hunting me. I was panicked and I needed to calm down, so I frantically looked for footsteps, and I remember being so relieved to have found them, I could have cried. I followed them as far as I could until the fog started to clear and I could find my way out. I reached the edge of the tree line and I could finally see the light of day again, but then I realized that something else was off. I looked around and I couldn't see my house anywhere. But there was another house, and it must have been really old because it was falling apart. The roof was almost bare, the front door was wide open, and the paint was peeling off of the walls. I walked around and thought I must have made a wrong turn somewhere on the way, but I couldn't see my house or anything familiar anywhere. The only thing I could think of at the time was, what if the footsteps I followed weren't mine? And if they weren't, whose were they? I couldn't believe what was happening. I contemplated going back into the forest, but I couldn't bring myself to go through it again. So I decided to walk around to the dirt road. Finally, after 45 minutes of walking, I saw my house and ran the rest of the way home. How was it possible that I went that far through the forest? It went by so fast. I decided to try to be happy that it was safe at home, rather than dwelling on what had happened. I walked inside the house, and as usual, my parents asked me where I went. I said I went for a walk. I ate dinner and proceeded to go on my computer to surf the internet and to listen to music. But the internet at that house was horrible, but providing the location, it was understandable. When I was surfing the internet, it would completely turn off and on at random times. It was strange. And also at times, the screen would flash unusual colors, turn negative, and go black to red randomly. I got tired of it and went to bed while listening to my music. I suddenly woke up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night to a pitch-black room, with music playing in the background like a surrounding white noise. I got up and turned the music up a bit before I heard something weird outside. I wiped the thick condensation off my window and looked toward the tree line, only to see the trees blowing in the wind, making the hollow noise of 1,000 dead symphonies, but nothing else was noticeable. I shut my window, went back to bed, and I tried to go asleep. But I couldn't get rid of that feeling that I was being watched. It was the same feeling that I felt in the forest that day. I put my covers over my head, and I shut the world out, and finally fell asleep. I woke up to the sound of feet running across the hardwood floors, and all of a sudden my door swung open, and my mom said, "Get up, you have to see this," with the most horrified look on her face. As you can guess, I was very confused at the sudden change of pace, so I slipped on my pajamas and ran downstairs to where my parents were standing. They were both looking at the door from the outside, with a vigorous intent that made me curious to see what it was. I walked outside through the side door and went around to see that there was a huge black X painted onto the red door. It was still slightly wet, and the paint dripped down the door just a bit. My parents looked at me sternly and asked if I'd seen anyone around the house lately, and of course, I hadn't, so I said no. My dad called the nearest painter to get the door painted over, and he came over relatively quickly. In a half an hour he was there, and in another half an hour he was gone. The door was painted over with white, and I guess it was a good change because the red door had never really matched the house before, so I didn't worry about it. I went back inside and played video games for the rest of the day because I had nothing else to do. I wasn't going to go back to the forest, but that thought seemed to resonate in my mind though. What happened to that house that I had seen? Who lived there? How did I not know it was there for the 4 years that I lived here? I wanted answers, but it was too far away, and honestly, I was scared of it for some reason. I went to bed that night thinking of the forest and the house because I was strangely intrigued. And I guess after all, what else is there to do around here? It wasn't too much of a shock that I woke up around 3 a.m., again, early morning, and I couldn't go back to sleep. This time my music was off, and the only audible noises were the hearkened cries of the woods. They seemed to be louder than ever, and my ears couldn't shut out their noises despite my best efforts. I got up and looked outside, and I saw a big windstorm knocking down the dead and decayed trees over, but leaving the strongest to make their hollow, whistling cries. I got that feeling again that I was being watched, so I looked around the tree line, and my eyes were drawn to the very edge of the trees, near my house, where I saw someone staring up at my window, looking right into my eyes. I looked closer, and I saw it was a young girl with black hair, wearing a small white dress with blue eyes that seemed to glow in the moonlight. And she was just standing there, not even affected by the wind. I sprinted downstairs, threw the door open, and ran outside towards where I saw her. But she wasn't there. I looked around at all edges of the tree line, and I saw her. She stood there, staring at me, and when I started to awkwardly walk towards her, she turned around and ran into the forest. Stupidly, I decided to chase her. The forest was way darker than I expected, and it was even scarier than before. But I wanted answers, and she was just too suspicious. She ran through the trees so fast, it was hard for me to catch her, and the way she treaded the path made it seem like she knew it very well. She weaved between the elms and dodged the branches that slowed me down, making it even harder to catch her. And behind me, I could hear trees falling, but that couldn't slow me down. I then fell over a big tree branch, and before I could get to my feet, we were at the clearing. I looked towards the middle and I saw the girl walking to the old house that was eerily illuminated in the moonlight. Before she got there, she turned around and said softly, "Lauren, I've something to show you." Her voice was very frail, and it seemed to echo and resonate throughout the entire forest. "How do you know my name?" I yelled, but of course, she didn't answer. I knew I shouldn't have gone this far, but there was something about her that made me curious about what she was doing here. She led me into the house, and there was this really strange feeling about it, like there was something else here, or she had been watching me again. I walked around the creaky old house searching for a clue as to where the girl went, and I could still remember how strange the air felt. It was freezing, but room temperature at the same time. I was sweating, but I had goosebumps, and I was shivering. There were old, ragged child's dolls scattered on the floor, and a small book in the middle of it. I picked it up right as I caught the sight of the girl walking downstairs towards the basement. I ran after her, but as I stepped down the stairs, all I can remember is falling through, and then everything fading into black. I woke up to daylight the next morning in the middle of the field, still with the little black book in my hands, but no recollection of what had happened. I got up, still dazed and confused, and looked around to see that the field was completely empty. Even the house was gone. Despite how confused I was more scared, and I decided to go back home the same way I went before. I eventually got back to the house, and I felt so relieved until I saw it. I walked to the front of the house to see that the new white door was painted red again. I went inside and walked upstairs to ask my parents if they already repainted it, but they were just as confused as I was. They also asked me where I went, and I told them that I must have been sleepwalking because I woke up outside. When they went to investigate the door, I went to the bathroom to take a shower. When I went to take my shirt off in the bathroom, I noticed that it was mostly covered in a dark red substance. I figured it was blood. I felt that it was still wet, and it was definitely paint. I quickly looked in the mirror to see that there was paint on my face as well. I had so many questions. I broke down a little bit on the floor of the bathroom and cried. I quickly regained my composure and decided to pretend that nothing had happened, that the day before would just wash away like the water in the shower. The rest of the day, I sat on my bed and tried to contemplate what happened the night before, but then I remembered the book. I frantically searched my room, and I found it in the back pocket of my jeans. I opened it up to the first page, and there was a name written in black ink. From what I could tell, it said Lorna Brookhart, and I found a strange familiarity that we had such similar names. I flipped through the pages, and there was nothing but random letters and scribbles. Some pages were random words and pictures, but there was nothing I could make sense of, until the last page. The last page had a drawing of a red door with a giant black X painted on it, and underneath the picture, there was writing. "He came to my house last night. I'm next, and it's too late to stop him." I dropped the book on the floor in a state of shock, and just sat back on my bed and thought about everything that's happened. Was that house even real? I decided I would go ask my parents about it, to see if I'm going crazy or not. I walked to the front door of the house to find them outside, and I came out with it. I asked, "Are there any other houses or clearings near here?" And they looked at me quizzically before telling me that there weren't. Now at this point, I realized I must have been going crazy, because there's no way I just imagined this place. and then I decided to walk the way around the forest to look for the clearing. But to my dismay, after walking an hour and a half, there was not one clearing. Nothing. I got back home by nighttime, and I just sat in my room for the rest of the night pondering the possibilities of what had happened. I couldn't think of anything reasonably possible other than I'm going insane. I went to sleep that night knowing that I would surely wake up in the middle of the night to something strange happening, and I was scared for what or who might come. To my surprise, I woke up, and from what I could recall, I didn't wake up at all in between. I was ecstatic because I felt like it was over and I was okay. Nothing happened. I looked outside my bedroom window, and there was nothing unusual. I went on my computer to see what time it was, figuring it was morning, but it was 6 p.m. Now the confusion came back. How is it that I slept all day? Now, something's wrong here. I walked around the house, but I couldn't find my parents anywhere, and so I went outside to look for them. I ran around to the backyard where I used to play soccer, the side of the house, then the front, to see something unnervingly familiar. Once again, the black X was painted on the red door, and I couldn't help but feel that it was why my parents weren't home. That and the fact that their car was still in the driveway. I lost all hope as to where my loved ones were, and so I decided to walk through the forest, and for once, I wasn't scared. I felt strangely desensitized and emotionless as I walked through the ominously dense forest. I knew I was being watched, but I wasn't scared at all. I walked for a while and I was shocked to see the house in the middle of the field again, but it wasn't in a field anymore. It was the middle of the forest. I was frozen for a second, but I ran to it as soon as I snapped out of it. It was like I was drawn to it for some reason, and I couldn't stay away from it. When I approached the house, there was something different about it. The door wasn't red anymore, and there was a giant tree growing right through the middle of the house, going up through the roof. I walked to the porch and started to remember that night. Me falling through the stairs and getting knocked unconscious, walking back home and painting the door red, walking back to the field where I would fall asleep. I went to step inside, but before I could, the girl came out and reached for my hand. She looked every bit as creepy as that first night, her eyes sunken into her skull, and she was completely pale. But I hesitantly grabbed her hand. She told me her name was Lorna, and that she had something for me again. She led me up to the stairs to an attic with a big stained glass window, and walked over to the closet. I got nervous for the first time since the night before when she went to open it, and it was for good reason. I know now after she opened the door. My mom and dad spilled out of the stained wood, one by one, piece by piece, and I immediately had flashes of waking up in the middle of the night. I remembered waking up, grabbing the fire axe, and slowly walking into my parents' room while they were sleeping. I must have been sleeping too, because I don't remember it, but I was too quick. They didn't hear me coming, but before I knew it, they were screaming helplessly as I buried the sharp axe into their delicate throats. Blood sprayed everywhere, on the bed, the ceiling, my clothes. Blood pooled around their bodies as I cut them into pieces. I remember the terror in their eyes as I dug the axe into their soaking wet flesh and cut through hard bones, until the terror was gone when their bodies went limp with lifelessness. I clearly remember folding up the blanket with them in it and bringing it through the forest during the massive windstorm. I could feel the blood dripping through the blankets, and the trees reached towards me as if they were congratulating me, helping me carry out this dreadful yet beautiful task and as the wind blew through the woods, it felt like they were cheering their eerily familiar cry. This time I knew it was for me. I brought them back into the abandoned house where their final resting place would be, and then went back to paint the X on the door. I remember the night in the field when I was unconscious. There were people whispering to me. They were whispering to tell me to do things I had no intention in doing, but I knew that I had to. I'm sitting there, staring at my parents' bodies, still dripping red with blood, and I don't feel a single thing. I asked her why she made me do it, and she said, "I didn't. You did it on your own." And that's when I thought about the diary. I asked her if her name was Lorna, and she said yes. I asked what she meant in her diary, why the last page said she was next, and that she was too late. But she didn't say anything. She got up and spoke finally. "Now it's time for me to go." And I sat over beside my parents and just looked at them. I sat beside their decaying foul guts, and I didn't feel any emotion. I knew this wasn't over, but when I walked outside the house to look for Lorna, she was gone without a trace, and the only sign of life, or death rather, was a trail of my parents' blood leading to the house from the wretched path that brought me here. Now I sit here beside the decaying bloody remains of dismembered people that I used to love, and as I scrawl out these words into the tattered pages of the tiny black diary that Lorna left with me, I know why I'm here. These are the chronicles of woe, and this is my story. Everything that I did was for a reason. I was next, and I couldn't stop what happened. She led me into her trap, and she cursed me in the forest. I'm stuck here now, and I can't leave. I'll find a way to destroy the curse, and I'll protect these woods until I can be set free. You see, as the water of life drops from the dead branches of time, and as it shatters to dust on the ground, I realize I must wait forever for these flowers to bloom. I've waited for years for her to come back, but she's gone, and so is everything I loved. She took them away from me for her own desires, but now I must wait for the flowers to consume the dead. But the flowers will never bloom, for they were cursed by the one that brought me here. In these woods, night swallows the sun, and all life has faded away now that I'm locked away in the heart of them. Once you're here, you can never leave.